busy in your absence.
Their first game nearly failed.
Nothing will go wrong.
A year before we shipped Half-Life 1, people in the company looked at what we had and said, this isn't good enough.
We made some pretty big mistakes.
And their second was stolen right out of their own offices.
At the time, it was shocking.
That was a dark day for us at Valve.
I had people in the company coming to me and saying, you know, are we going to go out of business?
But they took the world of gaming to the next level.
It's just amazing now that what we can do.
It was more than just a video game.
It's more and more possible for more people to look at games as not just entertainment, but an art form.
This is the amazing story of Valve and Half-Life.
Wake up and smell the ashes.
In 1996, a software developer at Microsoft named Gabe Newell is struck with a new idea.
I got to know the guys at id, and the more I thought about what they were doing and the successes they were having with their distribution models as well as their technology, the more it seemed to me that that would be a lot more fun than working on operating systems.
Gabe isn't the only person at Microsoft thinking about getting into gaming.
Mike Harrington and myself met while we were working at Microsoft. We were both working in the operating systems group. We both worked with a guy named Michael Abrash, who's pretty famous as a game writer, and who also went over to id. Mike and I started thinking about possibly starting a game company.
In 1996, Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington leave Microsoft to form Valve Software in Kirkland, Washington.
Valve was really all about controlling the flow of an entertaining experience, having your hand on that knob, deciding when to turn it up, turn it down. That was a compelling metaphor.
We signed the LLC agreement the same day that I got married. I was standing there all dressed up to go off and do my wedding vows, and Mike is frantically shoving papers under my pen so that we can get that taken care of. It certainly makes it easier to remember the company's anniversary and my wedding anniversary since they're on the same day.
It was a novice game company, and guys from Microsoft who worked with games and worked with software, but not put together a game project.
Michael Abrash was one of the first people we contacted and said, you know, can you give us advice? Michael Abrash was like, rather than going off and doing your own engine, you should come down to Texas and see what John Carmack and he were working on.
Mike and Gabe and a couple other people went down to Texas. They had the code on a CD on the plane on the way home. They were just convinced this was the way to go.
Valve has an engine. Now they need to figure out what to do with it.
We were originally working on two projects simultaneously.
One was a first-person action game.
The other one was Prospero, which was a very different game. It was much more of a fantasy epic.
That when we had played Doom, there seemed to be sort of two directions. One was this sense of very fast-paced, sort of a blaster, being in a shooting gallery. But Mike and I weren't as good as a lot of the people playing, so our sense of Doom was much more like, this is a really scary place, this is a very dangerous place. We're not in a shooting gallery, we're a target in a shooting gallery. And it was that sense of being in this world that we thought was really interesting.
Valve ultimately decides to do a first-person shooter called Half-Life.
Good morning, and welcome to the Black Mesa Transit System.
Half-Life 1 started with something which was sort of revolutionary at the time, which was we started you off in an ordinary day at work with no weapons and no sense of peril. You were just a scientist named Gordon Freeman.
Morning, Mr. Freeman. Looks like you're running late.
It was showing up for a day at work at the Black Mesa research facilities.
Weren't you supposed to be in the test chamber half an hour ago? Procedures today, Gordon.
You started the day involved in an experiment that went badly wrong.
Oh, hell literally broke loose. All of a sudden, from mild-mannered scientist, you become a crowbar-wielding savior of the universe. It's a perfect sort of story setup for what then becomes a fight for survival.
Really, it was just the momentum of Half-Life that caused the production of Prospero to stop.
It's not long before Valve realizes the pieces of Half-Life aren't fitting together.
About a year before we shipped Half-Life 1, people in the company looked at what we had and said, this isn't good enough.
We looked at what we had accomplished so far and realized that we made some pretty big mistakes in terms of how we were going to achieve these effects. So we seemed to, at that point, be at a juncture.
The team must decide to either ship the game as it is or to throw out everything and start fresh.
Oh my God, we're doomed! It's about to go critical. Aren't you supposed to be in the test chamber half an hour?
By 1997, after an entire year spent in development, Valve decides that Half-Life is missing the mark and gives the game a complete redesign.
You know, we really believed that the right thing to do was to focus on building something that's really good, in spite of the fact that it was going to cost us a lot of time, cost us a lot of money. And also, it's just very stressful to have been working, you know, at that point for a year and say, okay, well, we haven't really gotten as close as we would have hoped by now to the thing that we were wanting to create.
The decision has an unexpected effect on the team.
So rather than demoralizing everybody, we were dealing with our situation honestly, that we were admitting that things weren't up to par yet, and that they were really glad to see our commitment to building a really good game. Surprisingly, I think that morale actually got better.
To get Half-Life done right, Valve adopts a unique approach to game development.
So as we design the games here at Valve, a lot of the design teams tend to break off into subgroups known as cabals.
Which was a more collaborative process, sort of allowed people to participate in an additive way without having to be hypercritical or argumentative. It was most productive working through all the details of building a game design.
And that was enormously successful. What we ended up doing was build cabals around different pieces of functionality, like Half-Life multiplayer had its own cabal towards the end.
It doesn't take long to get Half-Life back on track.
One of the most important things about Half-Life is that we kept a really immersive first-person experience, and we never broke it. We had talked about going away to a third-person camera at times, and we decided that was a bad idea, that we wanted to keep the pressure on for the whole time, so that you're in this character, and these things are happening to you, and we don't let the pressure up.
In creating the character of Gordon Freeman, we wanted to do someone who was quite a bit apart from the typical action game hero. We wanted to do a character who was really transparent and everyman, not your typical action hero.
We decided that we wanted to do something that hadn't really been done in a first-person shooter.
You're alive. Thank God for that hazard suit.
And have these characters that were allies that made it more fun to move through the game with.
Lead the way.
We'd done the scientists and Barney who would talk to you.
Let's get the hell out of here.
Follow you, and they had some behavior. They would reveal bits of the story as you went through the levels.
Don't count on Captain finding us down here. Wait for the surface.
You know, we were really excited at that point that we had made, you know, a character whose mouth could move while they were playing.
Destroy the damned thing before it grows any larger. Stop!
That ended up being a really good assumption to make. People talk a lot about how much they loved Barney and would drag several Barneys through the game with them and really protect them and not let them get killed.
The different thing that Valve did with AI was really just the amount of attention we paid to it.
Soon, the gaming world starts paying attention to this new first-person shooter.
In 1997, when we went to our first E3, we were off the main hall. Initially, people weren't very aware of us, and then the word of mouth started to pick up. Gotten a lot of support and ended up winning, you know, the best action game of the show.
Valve finally releases Half-Life in November 1998, and it takes the industry by storm.
It was more than just a video game. It actually was almost like a movie in the way that it played out.
Open the silo door! They're coming for us! It's our only way out!
Valve was able to do something that had never really been done before with a video game.
It mixed science fiction and horror in this really boiled down, intense way.
We weren't really expecting anything like the kind of response we got after it was released.
Half-Life is named Game of the Year by 50 different publications. It makes $22 million in sales in its first year, and will go on to sell 8 million copies worldwide, bringing in more than $100 million. 2 best-selling expansion packs are also released for the game. A large part of Half-Life's success is also due to user-created modifications, such as Counter-Strike.
The mod phenomenon with Half-Life was a major boon to the entire PC industry. The mod community kept Half-Life at the top of the sales charts for years.
No! Get it off me! Get it up!
I was really interested in the whole theme of military warfare and terrorism and counter-terrorist units. To me, that just made sense to make a game out of that.
As Counter-Strike got more and more popular, by about the 4th or 5th beta, we had surpassed Valve's games in terms of player numbers.
Counter-Strike will go on to become the most played online game in America. Meanwhile, plans for Half-Life 2 start up right away.
Rise and shine, Mr. Rise and shine.
Half-Life is a worldwide phenomenon, but Valve Software isn't done yet. Development on Half-Life 2 starts in 1998.
There was a meeting early on with the Half-Life 2 team where I said, you don't have to worry about how long it's going to take. You don't have to worry about how much money you're going to spend. The only thing you have to worry about is making it the best game of all time.
Here in the art war room, as we call it, the artists went out on location to find a lot of references for Half-Life 2.
Half-Life 2 will take full advantage of all the latest technological innovations.
In Half-Life 2, the technologies in the source engine really grew out of our desire to create these things when we were working on Half-Life.
And we've really gotten to a point now